Hello, everyone. My name is Mike LaChemina, and I'm a dentist in Houston. I also have an interest in Mormon history. And so I just wanted to record my presentation that I gave recently at the John Whitmer Historical Association Conference, which was held on September 22nd, 2023. Just happened to be the 200th anniversary of Moroni Day, Moroni's appearance. For anyone who might be interested, since the conference was held in Fredericksburg, Texas, I decided to speak about Mormon history in Texas. Uh, Titled my presentation A History of the Smith-Rigdon Movement in Texas from a Texan's Perspective. And although I'm not actually a native Texan, I moved here during high school and then I served my mission here and I've lived here for the past 16 years. So I consider myself to be mostly a true Texan now. So I'll start by discussing Lyman White's colonies and the early LDS settlements. Then I'll talk about each of the other branches of the restoration that have a presence here in Texas, and I'll end by discussing Ervil LeBaron's 4 O'Clock Murders and Warren Jeff's Yearning for Zion Ranch. The first Mormon known to have entered Texas was William Steffi, who was ordained by Willard Richards to preach the gospel while here on a business trip. The second Mormons to come here were Lucian Woodworth and George Miller, who were sent as representatives of the Council of 50 to meet with Sam Houston, President of the Republic of Texas, in March of 1844. Houston invited the Mormons to settle in the Nueces Strip to serve as a defensive buffer between the Texans and the Mexicans, but Joseph Smith died before a decision could be made. Woodworth wrote a letter to Houston informing him of the martyrdom and attempting to convert him to the faith, sending the Book of Mormon and Doctrine and Covenants along with the letter. As a side note, Lucian Woodworth's 16-year-old daughter Flora was one of Joseph Smith's plural wives, and Lyman White's son, who is named Orange, attempted to court her before finding out that she was already secretly married. Speaking of Lyman White, here's a photo of him with Harriet, the first of his 5 wives. He was born in 1796 in New York, fought in the War of 1812, and then became a follower of Smith-Rigdon in Ohio. Along with Isaac Morley, he started a utopian community known as the Family, and then was converted to the Church of Christ by Oliver Cowdery and Parley P. Pratt in 1830. He served a mission to Cincinnati, baptizing 100 people, and served 10 more missions after that. He was the first person ordained to be a high priest, and in turn ordained Joseph Smith to the high priesthood. He was a member of the Council of 12, the Council of 50, and the Quorum of the Anointed, and W. W. Phelps nicknamed him the Wild Ram of the Mountain. He built a house in Missouri on land which later became Adam-on-Diamond. He was second in command during Zion's camp and was simultaneously a colonel in the Missouri militia and the leader of the Danites. Being accused of treason and murder, he spent 4.5 cold months in Liberty Jail, where he witnessed Joseph Smith Jr. give a blessing to his son, Joseph Smith III, ordaining him to be his successor. Here's a colorized version of his photo and an artist's rendition of what he may have looked like when he was younger. In 1841, he and George Miller were sent to Wisconsin to obtain lumber to build the Nauvoo Temple and Nauvoo House. In a Council of 50 meeting in May 1844, White asked if he could relocate the saints from the Wisconsin pineries to Texas, and Joseph agreed, but he was killed in Carthage just a few weeks later, unfortunately. So being fiercely loyal to Joseph and not caring to follow Brigham Young, White started on his journey to Texas with 150 followers. They spent their first winter at the abandoned Fort Johnston, named after Albert Sidney Johnston, the commander of the Texas Army, who was soon to lead the U.S. Army to Utah. In the spring, they settled in Austin, where White preached a sermon in the Capitol building. And in 1847, they found better land near Fredericksburg on the Pedernales River, or Pedernales if you're from around here in Texas. They named their town Zodiac because the first astrological sign is Aries, or the ram. They built a grist mill, a sawmill, a furniture factory, and a shingle factory, and they lived the law of consecration according to common stock principles. By all reports, they were an industrious people living in a beautiful town. They even built a temple, which also served as a school and storehouse. And they sent missionaries to Iowa and East Texas. White wrote a letter to the other apostles in Utah, extolling the virtues of Texas, saying, "Come then, all ye inhabitants of the earth, come ye to the beautiful valleys of Texas." It didn't help, however, when he called the Utah apostles long-eared jackasses. In response, they referred to Whiteism as the Texas epidemic and sent Lucian Woodworth and Peter Haas to convince White to sustain Brigham Young. White refused, claiming that he was the most senior apostle according to age, and he was excommunicated from the Brighamite Church. Bishop George Miller, who we see here, joined the Whiteites in Zodiac, but he and White had frequent financial disputes, causing Miller to move back to Wisconsin, where he became a Strangite. Although White didn't think Brigham Young should be the next prophet, he also didn't claim to be Joseph's successor himself, having witnessed the blessing in Liberty Jail. Since Joseph Smith III wasn't old enough to lead the church, White joined forces with his uncle William, merging their two churches, with William serving as president and Lyman as first counselor. William's branch in Covington, Kentucky moved to Zodiac, but this coalition didn't last too long due to differences of opinion between the two headstrong men. Zodiac flooded in 1851, so they moved and started the town of Mormon Mill. 3 years later, they moved again due to Indian raids, this time to Mountain Valley near Bandera. In 1858, White decided to abandon his Texas adventure and move back to Jackson County to join the new organization, the precursor to the reorganization. On the second day of their journey, White passed away in the town of Dexter, most likely due to an opium overdose, and he was buried in Zodiac. Some of his followers continued on their journey. Some stayed in Texas, eventually joining the RLDS Church, and some, including his oldest son Orange, settled in Utah and became Brighamites. Here are two of Lyman White's descendants, Heman C. Smith, an RLDS apostle and church historian, and LDS apostle Boyd K. Packer. Next, the Strangites also had a bit of history in Texas. In 1847, James Strang sent 2 missionaries to investigate the possibility of relocating from Voree, Wisconsin, and they procured 10,000 acres south of Houston. However, due to concerns about an impending civil war, the Strangites moved to Beaver Island, Michigan instead. Then, in 1855, when persecutions on Beaver Island were flaring up, 2 more missionaries were sent to Texas, and they obtained land in the Rio Grande Valley. Shortly after they returned to Michigan, however, Strang was assassinated, and the Strangites scattered. His son Gabriel moved to Houston, where he lived until he died in 1937, the only member of the Strang family to keep the faith. Pleasant Odom was born in 1831 in Georgia. He served in the Confederate Army and then moved to Alabama, where he was converted to the LDS Church in 1886 by John Bramwell, a missionary from England. His family migrated to the Mormon settlement of Manassas, Colorado, but they only stayed 2 years before moving back south, settling outside of Woodville, Texas. The Odom family property became known as Odomville, and Pleasant Odom led the church there until he died in 1915. William Williamson, born in 1829, was a Louisiana cowboy who served in the Confederate cavalry. He married Josine Desmarais, a French Catholic, and they obtained a homestead near Vidor, east of Houston. Josine gave birth to 15 children, 10 of whom survived to adulthood. They attended a Free Will Baptist church, the only church in the area, but William never complied with his wife's request to get baptized due to his Universalist leanings. At one point, they took in an elderly man, a Mr. Busley, and cared for him until he died. Busley had served in Johnston's army in the Utah War, and he told the Williamsons stories about Brigham Young and the Mormons, having a very positive view of them. Then, in the year 1900, LDS missionaries knocked on the Williamsons' door. William let them spend the night due to an approaching thunderstorm, and they ended up staying a full week due to the swollen creeks preventing them from traveling. By the end of the week, the entire family was converted and baptized. Over time, the spouses of their children and their families were also converted. Descendants of this extended family still live in Williamson Settlement, a rural subdivision with about 100 homes surrounding an LDS meeting house. William passed away less than a year after being baptized, and here we see a picture of his headstone in the Williamson Cemetery. The Williamson branch was organized in 1914, and today there are 3 Williamson wards. A monument was erected in their honor with an inscription which reads, "The heritage of the past is the seed that brings forth the harvest of the future." Williamson Settlement has an especially high percentage of attorneys, and for a century was 100% LDS, but that changed about a decade ago when the lawyers started a lunchtime Mormon book club discussing books such as Rough Stone Rolling. This led to about a dozen prominent families experiencing faith crises and either resigning or being excommunicated for apostasy, fracturing the family, the church, and the neighborhood. In 1907, Elder Mark Hickson baptized several families near Madisonville, north of Houston. A branch was organized in 1910 with A. Stiles Beeler serving as branch president. A friendly non-Mormon named Joe Shannon donated land for them to build their church, so they called themselves the Shannon Branch. The construction of a railroad brought more saints to the area, and in 1915 the town of Josie was formed, which was Joe Shannon's nickname, although most people referred to the town as Little Utah. Samuel H. Foster served as branch president for 38 years until 1957, when the branch was dissolved due to the closure of the rail line. Excuse me. Next, I'll tell you about the colonies of Kelsey and Enoch. John and Jim Edgar were brothers who were baptized in Alabama in 1890 and then moved to the Mormon colony of Mesa, Arizona. After a couple of years dealing with the Arizona heat, they decided to move back to Alabama, but they ran out of provisions in northeast Texas, so they farmed on rented land for a season. They liked the area so much they decided to stay. James G. Duffin, the mission president, thought the area would be an ideal gathering place for the Southern Saints, So a branch was organized with William C. Harless called as branch president. In 1902, Apostle Abraham O. Woodruff came to lay out plans for the town of Kelsey. Samuel O. Benyon, the next mission president based in Independence, Missouri, became known as the Father of Kelsey for his role in encouraging saints to settle there. Here we see a picture of the Kelsey branch, and this is a colorized photo of the leaders and missionaries. And here's a picture of a missionary conference. In 1910, a new meeting house was built, and the church also built a school, the Kelsey Academy, with missionaries serving as teachers. The population of Kelsey grew to 750, and then a new colony named Enoch was created 3 miles away, with a population of 250. They grew strawberries, cantaloupes, and corn to feed the oil workers in the area, but when the rail line closed, most of the saints moved to nearby Gilmer. So Gilmer was actually the first area I served in as a missionary in 1992. Located near Tyler, it's the home of the East Texas Jamboree and has a population of 5,000, about 10% of whom are LDS. That's a definite minority, but it's the highest percentage of any town in Texas. Gilmer is the birthplace of singers Johnny Mathis and Don Henley, as well as Mormon turned Baptist alternative folk singer Michelle Schacht. It's a very religious town with 57 churches, 33 of them Baptist, and 3 LDS wards. On my first day in the mission field, I saw this billboard and these posters all over town. Kelly Wilson was a 17-year-old Baptist girl who went missing and has never been found. The investigation involved her LDS boyfriend and his missionary cousin, as well as allegations of satanic rituals, and it exacerbated the already high tensions between the Baptists and the Mormons. There's a podcast about it called Deviltown if you want to learn more. Currently, the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints in Texas has 378,000 members, 78 stakes, 2 districts, 616 wards, 128 branches, 10 missions, and 4 dedicated temples. The first temple was built in Dallas in 1984. The Houston temple was dedicated in the year 2000 and was then quietly rededicated in 2018 after being renovated due to flooding from Hurricane Harvey. The Lubbock temple opened in 2002, and the San Antonio temple was dedicated in 2005. The McAllen temple is located at the very southern tip of Texas and was dedicated 2 weeks from the time, 2 weeks after the time I gave the presentation. So it would have been in October of 2023. And this is an artist rendition of the planned Fort Worth temple, and temples have also been announced for Austin and Prosper. The temple in Ciudad Juarez, Mexico, is directly across the border from El Paso and serves the saints in the far western tip of Texas. By the way, El Paso was the first stake in Texas created in 1952. The LDS Church runs 4 Bishop storehouses in Texas, as well as a Deseret Industries thrift store and a peanut butter cannery. They also own a farm and 2 cattle ranches, totaling 145,000 acres of investment property. So next, Community of Christ has 37 congregations in Texas, and they own Camp Cienito near Bandera. There are 5 mission centers, previously known as stakes, which includes some adjacent states and all of Mexico. These 5 mission centers have a combined membership of 5,800. The congregation in my area built a nice new building about a decade ago. The first time I visited them, they were renting a room at the YMCA, but they've grown since then. Hearn is located between College Station and Waco, and it's the only small town in Texas that's had 3 different expressions of the Restoration coexisting at the same time. Following Wallace B. Smith's 1984 revelation allowing for women's priesthood ordination, the RLDS congregation split into 3, with some forming an independent Restoration branch, while others joined with a handful of LDS members to form an LDS branch. The Restoration branch shut down in 2020 due to COVID and merged with the branch in Marlin, just 30 minutes down the road. Marlin had a reorganized branch for many years until they voted to become a Restoration branch in 1988. The RLDS Church sued to retain control of the church building, but the judge ordered in favor of the Restorationists. Restorationists are conservative dissenters who separated themselves from the RLDS Church in order to retain their traditional beliefs, and they formed independent branches, often using the name Church of Jesus Christ. In 1988, they created the Conference of Restoration Elders, or CRE, to organize conferences and reunions. And in 2005, the Joint Conference of Restoration Branches, or JCRB, was formed. The main difference between the two is that the JCRB allows for ordination to priesthood offices above that of elder. The JCRB has a meeting house in Dallas, and the CRE has a congregation in Fort Worth, which meets in a Masonic lodge. There used to be 9 Restoration branches in Texas, but 3 of them have closed and 3 are now small home churches. So a schism occurred in the Marlin Restoration branch in the year 2000, and half of the members converted to the Remnant Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, forming the only branch of the Remnant Church in Texas until they closed in 2020. The Remnant Church was started by Restorationists who wanted a prophet, and they chose Fred Larson, a descendant of Joseph Smith, but he died in 2019, creating a succession crisis. Larson named Harry Patience to be his successor on his deathbed, but Jim Van Cannon, Larson's first counselor, along with the president of the 12, formed the Everlasting Church of Jesus Christ in the latter day. Next, I'll mention the Remnant movement, not to be confused with the Remnant Church. They're also known as Snufferites because they follow Denver Snuffer, a Salt Lake attorney who was excommunicated from the LDS Church because he claimed that Jesus appeared to him. The Remnant movement has grown to include 85 house churches or fellowships, with 7 of them located in Texas. They view themselves as a restoration of the Restoration, and in many ways their beliefs are similar to traditional reorganized doctrines. They feel that Brigham Young and all successive LDS prophets have been in apostasy, and many of them believe that Joseph Smith never practiced plural marriage. In 2021, a schism occurred in the Remnant movement, with Phil Davis forming the Doctrine of Christ movement. The Church of Jesus Christ, headquartered in Monongahela, Pennsylvania, also known as Bickertonites, has one congregation in Texas which opened in 1997 in Fort Worth. The sign says, "Come to a Church of Miracles," which hints at their charismatic, spirit-filled services. It looks like they have a nice group of people there. And the Church of Christ Temple Lot, also known as Hedrikites, has 20 congregations, which they call locals. There's no local in Texas, but they do have a telecongregation led by an elder who lives in Round Rock. The next expression of the Smith-Rigdon movement I'll discuss is the Church of the Lamb of God, which was led by Orville LeBaron. The history of the LeBaron family is complicated, with Orville's father and 3 brothers all claiming to be prophets. Orville started out as a handsome, extroverted LDS young man, but devolved into a murderous, polygamous psychopath who claimed to be the one mighty and strong. At least 25 people were killed at Orville's command, some during his lifetime and others after his death. It started with the fratricide of his brother Joel, the filicide of his daughter Rebecca, and the assassination of Reuel Allred, the prophet of the Apostolic United Brethren. And it continued with anyone who went against him in any way. He was arrested in Utah in 1979, and while in prison he wrote the Book of the New Covenants, with revelations listing the apostates who required blood atonement. He died in prison in 1981, but that didn't mean he didn't continue to have control over his followers. The prophetic mantle fell on his son Arturo, who killed numerous apostates, including one in Texas, until he was shot in Dallas by rival prophet Leo Ivaniak, founder of the Millennial Church of Jesus Christ. 20-year-old Heber became the next leader, also blood atoning several people, including one in Texas, until he was arrested for robbing a bank in Richardson. Another son, Aaron, took over, and along with his sister Tarsa, was the mastermind behind the 4 o'clock murders. The 4 o'clock murders occurred on June 27, 1988, the anniversary of the martyrdom. Eddie Marston and Mark and Dwayne Chenoweth had previously pulled triggers for Orville, but were considered to be sons of perdition because they converted to evangelical Christianity. They were working at their appliance repair shops in Houston and Irving when they were shot simultaneously at 4 p.m. Sadly, 8-year-old Jennifer Chenoweth was killed because she happened to go to work with her dad that day. The murders were carried out by 3 of Orville's sons, who were wearing suits at the time, along with 3 of his daughters who drove the stolen getaway cars. If you're interested in learning more, I'd recommend this book and a podcast called Deliver Us from Orville. Fortunately, the Church of the Lamb of God hasn't killed anyone since 2013, and Orville LeBaron is now buried in Houston, not far from my house. Some of you may remember seeing the sad news of the 2019 shooting and burning of 3 vehicles of Mormon fundamentalists by the cartel in northern Mexico. They were former members of the Church of the Firstborn of the Fullness of Times, the LeBaron sect that Orville split off from. 3 women and 6 children were killed, but luckily 8 of the children escaped. A North Dakota judge ordered the cartel to pay the victims' families $4.6 billion, but we may be waiting a long time for that to happen. Lastly, I'll discuss the Fundamentalist Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. Warren Jeffs became the prophet in 2002, claiming to receive direction from his deceased father. He married all of his father's wives and consolidated his power by banishing the most successful men from the community, either assigning their families to other men or keeping them for himself. He prophesied that Salt Lake City would be destroyed during the Winter Olympics, but when that didn't come to pass, his dictates became more and more draconian, prohibiting TV, the internet, secular books and music, toys, and even the color red. Even worse, he ordered the police to kill all the pets in town. In 2003, under increasing scrutiny from the media and law enforcement, he went into hiding near El Dorado, Texas, 2 hours west of Fredericksburg, where the conference was held. On a 1,700-acre property, he built the Yearning for Zion, or YFZ Ranch, which also went by the code name R17. Outsiders were told that they were building a corporate hunting retreat, but they were actually building a temple. Eventually, 700 people moved to the YFC Ranch, but in 2006, Jeffs was placed on the FBI's most wanted list, and he went on the run. Police found him in Las Vegas in a red Cadillac Escalade, along with his brother Isaac and his favorite wife Naomi. He was arrested and tried in Utah and Arizona, but the cases were overturned on technicalities. Then, in 2008, a hoax call triggered Texas state troopers to raid the ranch. With SWAT teams and helicopters, they broke into the temple searching for evidence of child abuse. They found a vault, and on the lower right corner of the photo you can see the hole they cut into it, which was large enough for the smallest female officer to fit through, and she unlocked it from the inside. They found hundreds of photographs, documents, and audio recordings of the illegal sealings that were performed. This is one of the altar beds that was used to consummate the underage quote-unquote marriages. Child Protective Services removed 416 children from the ranch. And Jeffs was convicted in 2011 and was sentenced to life in prison in Palestine, Texas, although he's up for parole in 2038. 2 months ago, a Utah court ordered him to pay $152 million to his abuse victims. While in prison, he wrote a 1,000-page book titled Jesus Christ, Message to All Nations, the only book of Latter-day Saint scripture written in Texas. The revelations call on the leaders of every nation on earth to repent and release him from prison. Otherwise, God will destroy them. After he lost his final court appeal, the revelations became almost incoherent. Well, that's my presentation. I hope I've been able to share something of interest with you. And if you're not from Texas, I hope you find a way to come to the great state of Texas sometime. All right, thank you.